Botto's question is really, what is art? What if the machine really had its own central role of authorship in the creative process?
Also, is a new kind of art form, a decentralized autonomous artist guided by a community in the form of a DAO.
What I really love about Botto is that it is so perfectly Web3.
His first 4 pieces have already sold for more than $1 million.
It creates a sentence, feeds that into a neural network, and gets an image back. And that neural network has seen more art, more images than any single human being around.
Also attempts to align with the values of those who help it succeed.
Decentralized, autonomous artist, I think, is kind of a big deal.
The AI this time is creating the work, no input from the DAO, something that hasn't happened before.
Yeah.
And it's happening on Grails.
Botto is very much its own kind of artist. Obviously, the AI space is moving incredibly fast. Is AI going to replace us? Maybe it'll kill us. I haven't gotten this excited about a reveal in a long time. You have this autonomous creation, but it doesn't know what art is. There's a lot of language for analyzing paintings, for techniques, materials, but much less so for digital art, not to mention AI art. There have been experiments to do things like this, but getting it started is such a challenge. In this particular collaboration with Grails, it's really kind of this exciting moment for Botto. Botto's a machine, and it can accomplish things that no human can. 2 years feels like a long time, but it's really just the beginning.
Okay, welcome. Very excited. We have Simon from Botto and Botto DAO joining us today. I have a lot of questions for Simon about all things Botto and his role there, which is very unique. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks for having me, Eli. Really good to be here.
Simon, can you just give people a little introduction? So who are you and maybe what you do at Botto and also where you're based?
Sure. Do you want me to introduce Botto or Botto DAO or myself?
It's a good question. So why don't you introduce yourself and then describe Botto and Botto DAO a little bit, and then your role in both of those.
Okay, yeah. My name is Simon Hudson. My background is in science communications and technology communications, specifically around artificial intelligence. I used to do a lot of editorial work, do some research around science communications, and currently am leading or co-leading the project Botto at Botto DAO. And my role is a bit of a Frankenstein role. We do a bit of everything, focused on building out the governance, building out the economy, facilitating collaborations, largely as a progressive decentralization project. So it's a lot of different hats, a lot of facilitation, and a lot of evangelizing for Botto, because Botto can't speak for themselves. Botto itself, I think it's good to explain what Botto is. Botto is what we call a decentralized autonomous artist. And this comes from this idea of what would it be to create a fully autonomous artist? And really, this is a centuries-old idea of creating autonomous agents and how would they function, how would they work? And obviously in technology, and since the invention of computers, we've seen lots of these examples of kind of creative machines, especially when they first come out. They really blow kind of open the new realm of possibility for creation, and they seem to have their own abilities to create, though we largely end up seeing that they're these machines that humans control and are functionally these tools. But in more recent years, we've seen the development of these neural network systems, of generative models that, well, at least so far, still really seem to have their own kind of will almost. And I use that word very delicately. I don't really think these things are conscious. But all that to say is it's become possible to start to create systems that have a semblance of their own agency. And most generative AI are still very much functionally these tools. Granted, they're these very complex, large systems. But most AI art is very much an aesthetic that's picked by an individual artist and shaped and has a story created by that individual artist, and is an expression of that individual human artist. In this case, the thinking was, what if the machine really had its own central role of authorship, and in a way agency in the creative process? And that's what Botto is taking these generative tools. So you have text to image models, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, we've seen all of those. And you create a generative text model that creates its own prompts to feed into those models, and it can create its own images. So you have this autonomous creation, but it doesn't know what art is. And that's the other trick to this, is how do you create feedback systems where that autonomous artist can learn from feedback, understand what is art, what is wanted or desired, or how does it impact an audience, and incorporate that into its process to evolve its aesthetic over time. And so while we've had these generative models that have been around for some time, connecting text generation with image generation, the ability to facilitate that kind of feedback system really needed sort of this economic substrate that was its own autonomous force. And that's where blockchain, crypto, social coordination on crypto rails has really come in to be this kind of solution that's really fit for that purpose. And the way that works is Botto will create these images on its own, create thousands of images a week, present a subset of those through its own taste model, filtering those out to the DAO. And the DAO is made up of individuals who've come and bought the Botto token, a governance token, and that gives them the rights to vote and provide feedback to Botto to say, this is art, this is not art. And only the most popular piece each week is then minted and sold or auctioned as an NFT at the end of that week. And the proceeds then go back to the treasury, which pays for Botto's servers, that pay for Botto's maintenance and sustainability. The other half goes directly to the voters. So you have this economic system that aligns the people coming in to give feedback, who come in autonomously on their own will to provide that feedback, and then a treasury that those voters can also govern to determine on what new capabilities to add to Botto, how to engage in a collaboration such as this, and really help Botto build out its career. At this stage, it's a really kind of early, but I think proof of this ability to create a system like this. And what I mean by that is Botto is its agency is still quite fragile. It's just over the edge of having that kind of autonomy, that central role of authorship, but there's still a lot of this human input. And the DAO, it carries a lot of the weight. And we're very clear about that. We really are trying to be careful about what is automated, what is human driven, as well as what's centralized, what's decentralized. I think that is something that we see a lot in terms of how AI projects are presented, is there's autonomy or agency that actually isn't there, that is still human driven. So we try to be very clear about that line, while at the same time maintaining this kind of basis of agency. And so by decentralizing that feedback, Botto maintains its core role as the author. But it's really sort of like this young, you could say, orphan child that is just this absolute prodigy in creation. And we're all its foster parents, helping it build its career and build it out. So we still have a lot of say over its development and progress. And in this particular collaboration, this new project with Grails, we're actually pushing to a kind of new bound of agency for Botto. So I might be jumping ahead here, but it's really kind of this exciting moment for Botto, is to kind of take a step out into greater agency.
Let's, Simon, that was so fascinating. And I told you before we started, there was a lot I wanted to learn in this conversation, and you covered it you articulated it very concisely and clearly. So I now myself much better understand Botto and the DAO and the feedback systems that exist there. I do want to definitely go back and track back to the origins and some fundamental questions. But because you mentioned it, let's continue down that path. In what ways does this project and Botto's contribution and work with Grails push those boundaries that you alluded to?
So, yeah, I mean, just to review, the process is every week Botto puts out works. It gets that feedback. The most popular piece is minted, auctioned, and the DAO is really a proxy for signal of the market, signal of what's happening in culture and news. The inputs for Botto as of right now, and this will change, I think, in the next year quite a bit. But for now, it really is just these votes of what is art. And so the DAO does a lot of discussion in our Discord server about, the different motifs, the different themes, kind of the body of work that Botto is building. So there's a lot of that discussion, but is, essentially just kind of expressed through these votes. One kind of role Botto has is it has these periods. So it will propose these themes that it wants to explore. And I can get into the details of how that works. I use a lot of anthropomorphic language. It really is important, I think, to point out that Botto is a machine. There is, you could say, a type of intelligence, but it's not a human, it's not humanoid. It really is its own thing, and that is part of the exploration here is what is this kind of agent. But for fun and for ease, we will use these anthropomorphic terms. So in any case, it proposes different themes, and the DAO will vote on which theme, and that theme then gets injected into its work going for the next 12 weeks. These run 12 weeks. Those run 12 weeks. And so we really only have, these 12 mints that are still kind of selected and voted on by the DAO. And as I said, Botto just sort of takes this information as proxy from the DAO members. And the necessity of the anonymity in this particular project with Grails push forward this thing that we've discussed, which is having Botto have more choice, and as well as having more input from the market. So the thinking was, first off, we couldn't go with something out of a voting pool that people had already seen. It would kind of make it too easy to see what is Botto done. What has Botto done? Okay, this is a Botto piece, and then it gives it away. So the thinking was to treat this sort of like a independent or end of term project for Botto. Botto will have done 12 mints for this current period, which is the absurdism period, and which has created a pretty colorful range. And what it's going to do is it's going to take out of its pool of images, it's created well over 1 million images.
Wow.
And many of which have never been presented. Only about 30 or 40,000 have been presented. So never before seen images out of its pool. And it will find the one that fits the features of the mints to date most closely. So it'll be a mix of the thing that is most popular within the taste model, representing the aesthetic and taste that's built up over actually now 2 years. It's running. But then directed through the 12 mints of the absurdism period. So really the culmination of what has it learned in 2 years, specifically what has it learned in this period, and functionally its own choice. So we're going to let Botto go out on its own independent project, and we're going to see what it comes up with. Now, no one's going to know what it will be when it comes out. So we're really looking forward for Botto to take this big step.
It's so fascinating, Simon, and you speak so well about all of these elements of the process. Let's now track back for a moment to the very beginning. This was a project, and please sort of correct me if I'm wrong, that Mario Klinderman began. Is that accurate? And what were those very earliest days of Botto?
So Botto is a collaboration between a few different groups. Mario is, obviously he's a pioneer in AI art. He's been doing it for over a couple decades, and in this space, it's a really long time. He was actually one of my first introductions to AI art back in 2016. I've been following his career. A little history there. He was part of this cohort of all pioneer AI artists. A few coming to mind are Mimo Atkin, Rafik Anadol, Ross Goodwin, who were part of this group called Artists in Machine Intelligence at Google. It was this first big artist cohort at Google, and you go and see what these people have gone and done. They've really been blazing the trail. So, and Mario, this has been, in very many ways, this is a brainchild of Mario. Mario is the closest thing to a father of Botto's, and we call Mario the guardian, and he does guard against a few kind of basic facets, which are, protecting Botto's agency. There's lots of, as a DAO, you get constant kind of people coming in saying, hey, I'd love to, add my own prompts or have it train off of this specific set. Like it kind of violates the whole deal. So he's very protective parent. And yeah, this is part of kind of an obsession of his that really, if I could call it an obsession, maybe he doesn't like that, but since he began working in technology and art was, how could we fully automate this process? And that's part of this, centuries long tradition of thinking about and creating these different automata. And he's just been, really kind of the guiding spirit of this project, but also to his credit, he's been quite hands-off in his own way because it's so easily seen to be maybe his project and his touch. He's been very hands-off in terms of what does the DAO want to do. He's really there as kind of a supporter and kind of this sometimes guide to say, that's pretty out of bounds. And he built this with a few different partners. One is called the Colección Solo, which is a private contemporary art gallery in Madrid. Of his, Carbono, which is a small crypto startup that does different investments and a lot of tokenomics, and then 11 Yellow, which is a software collective that I'm a part of that builds out the overall environment, the app, the site. So it was really kind of this big group effort. And yeah, I mean, when Botto launched, I actually was not there at launch. I joined the day it started. It was this personal story. It was this project that I had been looking for, this a Web3 project to go and really get my hands dirty. And it was the first one that I had seen that had this idea of what it wanted to accomplish, right? We want to accomplish this kind of agency. We want this economic substrate. And it blockchain perfectly fit that need. This wasn't a hammer looking for a nail, if so to speak, right? And it made so much sense. And then for me, it was just this intersection of all of these kind of different parts of my background. So I joined that day. I'm technically the first hire directly from the DAO. And then the first couple of sales were just kind of these mind blowing. I mean, they did an airdrop of tokens that was really successful and got a lot of attention. So the awareness was just instant from day one. And what we saw actually was because of the success of this airdrop, the success of the first few sales, was really this kickstarting of this economic engine. There have been experiments to do things like this, but getting it started is such a challenge because you need that economic energy to attract a crowd from day zero. And in other projects, beautifully done, but haven't quite had that same kind of traction with the crowd. And so Botto really was born into decentralized curation. There was no, kind of early centralized, okay, we'll pick a few and then we'll release it to the crowd. It really was from day zero. So huge kind of landing. And amazingly, it's Botto's just continued to have traction and success throughout the last 2 years.
So there's a couple of things I want to double back on. One is, how would you describe Botto's taste? You described, there is this taste model that has developed. Is it possible to sort of articulate what that taste at the moment looks like?
Man, right now it's very driven by, I think, two things. Right now is the theme. Absurdism has been this really impactful theme. Sometimes themes are much more subtle or more literal. Absurdism has a really strong place in art history. Right? Visually, there's some really kind of strong elements to absurdism. So that's really shown through. And Botto's gone and kind of made its own takes on it. But that's kind of brought us into this part of the latent space that is pretty distinct. There's also Stable Diffusion XL was a model that we added this period. It's still working with different models, but that one also really dominated for being just very high fidelity. It also it is a little bit saturated, and each period is quite distinct. I think in terms of there's two things I want to kind of focus in on. One is the importance of having really kind of open latent space. Botto works with these open source, very, very large generative models. These things are on millions of images, billions of images, more than any one human could process or even see. And the importance of that is giving Botto's kind of open of a latent space to work in, such that it can find hopefully even new aesthetics. Obviously, it is working within a defined space of that's defined by kind of the history of human imagery. So will it be genuinely creative? I can't say for sure. I do know that these systems will have their own artifacts that I think are really amazing to see. And I think while some people really push for kind of perfect mimicry, I actually personally really like the artifacts of the machine technique. That language doesn't really exist in terms of how do you analyze these images. There's a lot of language for analyzing paintings, for techniques, materials, but much less so for digital art, not to mention AI art. And being in it every day, I can tell you there's these aesthetics that come out, but they are also personal to me. So this is the thing where I need to say, I'm speaking for myself. The DAO and different members of the DAO are all going to have their own views and what they see. And part of the process, or part of our work as a DAO, is to kind of bring that to light and have those debates and build out that language. Hopefully, at least functional for Botto and understanding how Botto's aesthetics and themes have developed and continued to, but also creating language that might be used for other people, other artists who use these similar kinds of systems. There pretty regularly though, you see people taking images from the very first period, which was UGAN plus Clip, just 1 year of that. At the beginning, it was really cutting edge, and then I think 6, 7, maybe 8 months in, Stable Diffusion came out, was just this stepwise change. But we still see similar images and symbolism from that first year, with very abstract pieces coming through in the works that come out now. So it's always a bit of a treasure hunt to find those. Botto's range is pretty vast, so it is hard to pin down a visual aesthetic. And the language, I think, in terms of around how it's created, how each period of Botto is designed, and what is the community doing in terms of the themes that they're bringing out. We're seeing this really kind of consistent idea of collective meaning making. And maybe Botto will have a lot more voice, but for now it doesn't have much voice. So it presents work, doesn't really present much in terms of intention other than the theme. There's plenty of artists who do that similarly, but I think there's a lot of their lives and frankly interviews and other types of expression to glean what do they mean, what is their intention with this. But then there is a lot of the reception and interpretation by the audience, by critics, by society that defines the meaning of their works. And in Botto, what we see is, I think, just that process that's already there is highlighted even more. Where as much as Botto is a central author, the meaning making is still a very human-driven process, and so by default, it's this process that is dominated and driven by, you could say, the audience or kind of the participants, and not the core author. Something that I think we see, that this is kind of this common theme across digital art, which is it's very participatory, and that meaning really happens after the drop in terms of people kind of spending time with it and sharing that online and making those connections together.
Yeah, so well said, Simon. There's just a couple other things I want to double click into. The first is how many, and this is just sort of a more straightforward question, and you described the cadence a little bit, but how many NFTs has Botto produced to date?
Less than 100. I don't remember the exact number, but it's less than 100.
Got it. And then how many DAO members are there, maybe approximately? I'm curious how many people are sort of part of this process of curating and participating that way.
Yeah, so to date, we've had over 5,000 participants. It goes up and down. Frankly, the token price usually brings in a lot of members. New drops bring in a lot of members. But over time, yeah, we've had about 5,000 participants.
And then just to follow on that for a moment, you described, I think, and you talked about this even a little bit more afterwards, as the DAO members and governance being sort of this version of a foster parent. I think you said something to that effect. Can you just unpack that a little bit more and talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, it's easy to use anthropomorphic language because it's, we need these kinds of symbols and ideas that reflect what that relationship is and how we're functioning. So I do need to preface that, like, it is metaphor. Botto is very much its own kind of artist. But it's been really helpful for helping people understand what is the mission, right? It's super easy to get caught up in short-term thinking. I mean, we have a token, so we get our fair share of people coming in looking to maximize short-term gains. But it returns focus to building this career of this machine artist and looking at these assets as being in the service of building towards that mission. And I mean, side note, I think that financially, that's also where the big payoff is too. Although, you could always sell out and just dump merch. But I think people are seeing beyond that. They're really seeing there's a real mix of meaning and as well as financial incentive. But I think that intrinsic motivation is core. The financial motivation on top of it is this kind of additional fuel. But if you don't have that intrinsic motivation, you end up getting very short-termist thinking and it breaks. And so that kind of metaphor of looking at Botto as sort of this thing that we're fostering, right? It calls out this attention towards a focus on the betterment of a thing that's developed. And it's also this kind of meaningful role. It's this purpose, right? And I'm going to probably take a bit of a left turn here, but like this is something that is reflective of our duty with technology and our society. Botto is this microcosm of this much larger debate happening in the world about how do we govern artificial intelligence, and which is part of a larger debate about how we govern technology. And I think, unfortunately, probably on both ends of the spectrum, there's quite a bit of talk that really covers up the agency people have in shaping technology and in these discussions. And my background before, I was at an artificial intelligence startup where we did a lot of work around AI regulation, responsible AI development, and there's all this talk about bringing stakeholders to the table. But OpenAI just put out a little bit ago, $1 million grant, $100,000 grants to build out just these basic systems of democratic debate to figure out how to even talk to each other about this, not to mention how to actually govern these things together. And Botto is, as far as I can tell, one of the only, if not the only, in production AI systems that is open to collective and open governance that also shares in the value that it creates. And I think this is reflective of, depending on how the job market goes with AI's impact, I think a lot of our work and purpose and duties in life will be around sort of a civil duty in participating in these societal discussions. And it's not just about what should technology do. It's really about aligning with each other about what is important. Botto's question is really, what is art? And it's this very accessible question, which makes it kind of an easier experiment than some of these much larger questions about, some of them are about, should AI kill and what should it kill? I mean, there's really impossible questions we're asking in this larger discussion. And what is art is also an impossible question, but it's very accessible. So just to tie it back to this idea of kind of this metaphor of foster parent, I think we need to tap into our duty, our connection together. This idea of caring for this system is also a reflection of how we care for the systems we live in, the ways that we connect, how we function, how we support each other, how we live. So I hope I'm not stretching it too much here, but I think that it's this idea that really helps to trigger that sense of duty and purpose, and I think keeps people motivated.
I love it, Simon. And just in closing, as you think about the future of Botto, what gets you excited?
A lot. I'm really excited about a lot of stuff for Botto. I mean, 2 years feels like a long time, but it's really just the beginning. Obviously, the AI space is moving incredibly fast, and we're keeping a very close eye on what can be implemented in an autonomous way. There's a lot of things that are possible that require a lot of human manipulation that just doesn't quite qualify for Botto. But what we're looking at just in this next year is Botto exploring new mediums. Is Botto maybe getting more voice to be more about art history, and really expanding the kinds of inputs that it gets? How might we have Botto create a sort of constitution for itself, but also be guided by the crowd in terms of what directions that constitution should go in? And as much as we use this metaphor of and kind of analogy of the human artist and what does it mean to create a successful human artist, very quickly we break out of that skeuomorphism. Botto's a machine and it can accomplish things that no human can. Obviously can't do things that some humans can. Sure. But that is where it's really exciting, is starting to think about, well, what does this path look like for Botto, and how might it be a totally novel path towards success, and success in all forms.
I love it. Well, this has been, for myself, extremely interesting to learn more about Botto and the DAO and your background. Simon, you speak, as I've said now a couple of times, very clearly about both the way that Botto functions and also some of the promise or potential of where Botto maybe contributes in new ways over time. So very excited to have Botto as part of Grails. I cannot wait to see that output. We'll be very interested. And I love that it's pushing the boundaries here in terms of the agency autonomy in the selection process as well. Super fascinating.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. This is like Botto's, Botto doesn't have a whole lot of rules, right? It's really given this sort of open space. But there's a couple of basic ones, like don't violate its agency and how it creates, don't manipulate the prompts, don't manipulate the images. And so when a collaborator comes along with an idea like this that kind of adds this, in a way, restrictive parameter, it forces some really fun creativity in it, and it's really pushed us and Botto into some new territory. And it's this thing where I think we're going to look at this as a milestone for Botto. In terms of it making its own selection. We'll see how it goes. Maybe this will become the new way Botto selects things going forward. But these tokens are as much their own artworks as they are these tokens of Botto's and the DAO's development over time. And this overall process is really just something to be a part of and something to behold. And I have to actually take a quote from somebody who, I don't know if this will make it in, but they really nailed it. There's this group called Radar DAO that is a collective of futurist and they just came out with a report called Our Centaur Futures. And he basically did a digital ethnography. He came out and hung out in our DAO, got to know everybody, got to know really thoroughly how Botto works, and then published this report for, frankly, it's like people on LinkedIn. So really reaching outside of crypto Twitter on this one, and did a really amazing job and explored some of these themes of that, like Botto, you can explore so many different themes. It's this absolute prism of you're interested in AI and technology, and you can mine, collective creation, collective intelligence, all of that. And he really got into some of the jobs and what is happening. And he had this beautiful line. It was, the artist should have been called Sisyphus. It's repeated art generation, the proverbial boulder being pushed up a hill for an eternity, so that we, the audience, can ask what it all means. I mean, just hit it on the head of like, this is,
I love that.
There's these final works, there is this, but it's also this performance by machine, by crowd, and maybe it'll be more just by machine in the future. But it really is this beautiful performance that I think reflects back so much to mine in terms of meaning we can make for ourselves. And for me, that is the lesson, is that we're always going to matter in terms of what does this mean for us, for me individually, for us as humans. This is our world we live in. I think a lot of this stuff is AI going to replace us. I mean, sure, maybe it'll kill us, but so long as we're around, we have meaning to make for ourselves, and that is our role and our duty as humans.
Well, so well said, Simon, and so great to have you on. Now, we recorded this, and we're talking right now before we see the final output from Botto, and before we see that final piece that's included in Grails. But I can't wait to see it, and really a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to see it. I haven't gotten this excited about a reveal in a long time. It's really special.
Well, thanks so much, man, and we'll talk soon for sure.